Time now to take a look at this week's injury report. It's being brought to you by Cape Regional Health System and Dr. Kevin McHale. Cape Regional Health System and Penn Orthopedics, the best of both worlds for a healthier life. For an appointment, call 609-463-CAPE or visit caperegional.com/orthopedics. Doc, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, as always.
It's always good, and there's always great stories to tell in the NFL. And another one happened last Thursday night, a week from tonight, where we saw the Thursday night football game, saw Russell Wilson go in that little tent, and he basically said, I'm okay, I don't need to be in here. So I think it's a very interesting thing. One, the concussion protocol. What exactly kind of goes on those sidelines with these new concussions, and how do the doctors tell whether the guys are kind of trying to fake their way through it? I think that's a fascinating thing now in this world where, hey, why don't you just tell the guy, my head doesn't hurt, How do you find out about these things, and what's kind of this protocol that the Seahawks apparently violated last week?
Yes, so, that probably would have been just fine in the 70s, 80s, maybe even in the 90s, just saying, hey, Doc, I'm all right, I just got my bell rung on to get back out there. But now it's different, And there's a lot of things that the NFL, as far as changes that have been made to help identify the concussion. The first thing is there's a lot of people now that have the ability to pull a guy off the field to get an exam. They give the officials, like what happened with Russell Wilson, have the right to do it. They have specialized athletic trainers that just sit in a booth and just look at film the whole time. They have at least two of them at every game to help identify these. Then you have the team docs, the trainers, the coaches, the teammates, the players themselves. So when that's identified, if there's a play at risk, that player is pulled off, they should enter what's called the concussion protocol. And it sounds like, obviously, if you watch that video, they clearly didn't do that for Russell Wilson. They didn't have time to close the tent door there. So there's two types of protocols. The first thing is the NFL sideline concussion assessment, and there's a much more detailed one that's called the NFL locker room comprehensive concussion exam. So with that first one, it's still pretty thorough. When you take a player off the sidelines and you have to look at them, you have to make sure that there's no signs of a loss of consciousness, confusion, amnesia, or anything like that, but also that they don't have any symptoms. They don't have any headache, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, blurred vision, any balance issues, anything like that. And then after you find that stuff out, you review the video, make sure there's no signs that the player was a little bit dazed when he was getting up, and you do a neuro exam. You look to see if there's objective signs, if he has balance issues, lack of coordination, kind of do that drunk test, make sure they can walk with their one foot in front of the other, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things you can do objectively and from the history, and a lot of very specific questions too, to make sure that they stay oriented. That, you ask them, what half is it in? Who'd you play last week? Did you win last week? Who scored last? Things like that, to make sure the player knows what's going on. And with all that, it really does a good job of identifying those that have a risk of a concussion. And once that's done, we bring them into the locker room and do a much more thorough eval to make sure that, we don't send someone back onto the field if they're injured.
Dr. Kevin McHale here on 97.3 ESPN. Dr. Mike dropped out for a sec, so we'll get him back up. But continuing some of the line of questions he had for you during the injury report here, one of the things he wanted to ask you about was Jameis Winston. Winston is expected to at least one more week in order to get the sprained AC joint in his throwing shoulder healed. Dirk Cutter said last week that the visit with James Andrews didn't require a change in the timetable. Surgery is currently not being considered, and right now they do believe that is resting is the best option. So what can you tell us more about this shoulder injury that has kept Winston out of a couple games this year already?
Yeah, so AC joint injuries, actually it's the most common injury you see in the NFL. It accounts for about a third of all the shoulder injuries. And in general, when you're talking about the AC joint, you're talking about the area where the collarbone meets the shoulder. So your acromion is that bony prominence on the outside of your shoulder, where it meets your clavicle, which is your collarbone. That's the AC joint. So this is typically injured exactly how, if you watch that replay of Jameis Winston getting driven to the ground and during that Saints game, that's how typically that injury occurs. His right arm was pinned against his side. He was driven into the ground. His shoulder strikes the ground. It pushes that acromion down and separates it from the clavicle. And as a result of that injury, you get a sprain to the ligaments, and even can tear the ligament to stabilize that joint. Now, the good news is, even though this is incredibly common in the NFL, most of the time, it doesn't require a long absence from play. These players that typically have fairly mild sprains are able to only miss maybe 1 or 2 weeks at all, and they get back out to play. And similar to what happened to him with that first injury in the Cardinals game when he got back to playing the next week. The problem is, he clearly re-injured that again in the Saints, and I wouldn't expect as quick of a recovery the second time around when you re-aggravate that injury. But still, it's pretty atypical to need surgery to get these fixed. We have a lot of surgical options to treat these and stabilize the joint. But there was one study that looked at over 700 of these players that had this injury in the NFL. Less than 2% needed a surgery. So the vast majority don't need the surgery to get back to playing at a high level. And I don't know how many of these free agent physical exams and medical clearances I did, but most of the players have little step-offs at their AC joint from some old AC joint sprain, and they're playing at a high level and having no issues. So it's unfortunate that in general, once it heals, he should be able to play at high level. It just might take a little bit to get him back out there.
Talking with Dr. Kevin McHale from Cape Regional. Dr. Kevin McHale, before we get Mike back on, Pete Carroll said that Kam Chancellor is seeing doctors after suffering a stinger Thursday night against Arizona. So what is a stinger? Like, what does that phrase even mean? We hear that phrase a lot, but what does it actually mean for the athlete's body?
Yeah, so there's a couple of phrases that get thrown around with stingers. You have stingers, burners, sometimes they call them dead arm syndrome. So in general, what we're usually referring to is an injury to what's called the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus is where all these nerves that come out of your neck kind of join and they redivide again to go turn to the nerves that go into your arm that provide your arms with the strength and sensation that you have. So what can happen is either from a direct collision or from what's called a traction or a stretch injury to the nerves, when somebody's neck gets pushed one way and the shoulder gets pushed down the opposite direction, you can injure this brachial plexus, this nerve group. When that happens, people will complain of burning pain that shoots down their arms. They can have significant weakness and numbness in that arm. And, when a team doctor can easily overpower a linebacker, they have a lot of weakness. And that's how we see on the sidelines. The weakness can be pretty profound, but the vast majority of these injuries you won't even hear about because it only lasts about 1 to 2 minutes, And in about a couple of minutes, typically the symptoms resolve. And once the player shows that they have full range of motion, full strength, no neck pain, nothing like that, they're able to get right back out and play. And that's it. Now, sometimes that weakness can persist. And when the weakness persists, usually it still recovers in about a day or so. But those are the players that, miss that rest of that game. And sometimes it can persist even longer, like several weeks. And those are the times that you need further imaging. And there's other red flags, too, that we look for. If they have numbness or tingling on both, arms, not just one, so that's a red flag. If they have neck pain associated with the red flag. And what you want to look for then is maybe it's not just a stinger or a burner like we usually say, but maybe there's something more going on in the neck. Sometimes you can have disc herniations in the neck that can lead to a pinched nerve or even lead to compression on the spinal cord. Obviously, these are much more serious conditions. Sometimes they just may need some significant time out from playing for rehab, or other times of surgery. So these are the kind of things that you'd be getting the MRIs and the X-rays to look for to make sure you're not missing someone and say, no, it's just a stinger, you're good to go.
Today's injury report with Dr. Kevin McHale is being brought to you by Cape Regional Health System. Cape Regional Health System and Penn Orthopedics, the best of both worlds for a healthier life. For an appointment, call 609-463-CAPE. That's 609-463-CAPE, or visit them online at caperegional.com/orthopedics. Dr. Kevin McHale, appreciate you working with us through the technical issues, and we'll catch you next week with Mike.
Yeah, no problem at all. I can lead the rest of the show if you need to. If Mike can't get back on there, I can stay on.
We appreciate the help, man. We really do.
All right, sounds good. I'll talk to you guys soon. I'll talk to you next week.